Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Legacy of Yangchen chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 26, which is called Aftershocks. So, not a hugely notable chapter here. We get the next Kavik report to the Order of the White Lotus, followed by a relatively short scene where basically Kavik, and the rest of the team have a meeting with Yangchen, and it's kind of significant because it's the first meeting kind of since the death of Nujian. There's set up here for the kind of Kavik kind of important sacrifice play to a certain degree in the final stage of the book here. Maybe it could be a little bit kind of clearer about specifically what it's going for, but I think it's reasonably well done. So we'll just jump in here with this one. So yeah, there's obviously been a little bit of a time skip. Like, we don't really address the initial aftermath of the previous chapter with regards to, specific kind of logistical things like, did they bury Nujian like there and then? How specifically a bunch of other stuff happened. There's one thing that they mention as having happened, which we'll get to in a second, but it's clear that a little bit of time has passed here, and now Kavik is giving his report to the Order of the White Lotus. So he basically does his tail slip route from the Avatar Mansion and makes his way to the meeting with Do, but also a Unirak is here as well. So they're in Taku, of course. We're in Taku for the kind of final stage of this, obviously. And she says, order some food. He says he's not hungry. And in a way, this is the limited way Kavik can mourn. He hasn't been hungry since Nujian died. And this is the little thing that he's doing to mourn Nujian. So he gives his report. He tells them everything about what they discovered on the island, except about the chi blocker girl, Xian. So he specifically leaves her out because it seems like she is actually going to get her kind of second chance. She wants to take that. She doesn't have the same perspective on her skill set as Raite did. And it says here, stay at the Western Air Temple for a while, maybe indefinitely. Now, I don't think the implication is that the group took a full-on detour to the Western Air Temple. I think it's more that, like, as they made their way inside, they kind of snuck her in, and then Yangchen organized, like, her to be kind of flown back to the Western Air Temple. I think that's more of the idea than there was actually a complete detour to the Western Air Temple, because it's relatively far away from Taku. Again, we don't know exactly on the map specifically where Taku is. Just a general idea, but it's still quite a distance away, and I don't think that is the intent there. But one thing that is quite interesting about this is that, oh cool, a chi blocker going to the Western Air Temple. This helps to at least put into position a few things. So the main connection we have with chi blocking in the Western Air Temple is Sister Ryoshan from the Avatar Legends role-playing game Roku era information. She is a air nomad from the Western Air Temple. She is the love interest of Princess Zaysan, also from the Roku era, of course, Sozin's sister. This is Ryoshan thought Zaysan chi blocking, and this moment here in the book, I think, is meant to be some sort of a kind of long form explanation for how chi blocking sort of makes its way to at least one of the air temples. Now, obviously, there's still quite a gap of time between where we are now in the early Yangchen era and what is effectively the middle of the Roku era, give or take, where the Legends RPG information is set. So we're still talking like, what, 3, maybe even 400 years. It depends on how old Yangchen is when she dies. But, I think it's a reasonable setup for, okay, this explains at least how the air nomads come into contact with a chi blocker in an earlier point in history. It's a nice little detail where it's not so specific, but you can definitely piece things together there. But anyway, Do then gets to kind of giving his reaction to the report, which is obviously as you would expect from the White Lotus of this era, you lost the last unanimity firebender. Like, this priceless asset lost again. And again, this is the second report from Kavik now, where he's had to report on bad stuff happening, negative things, failures from Team Yangchen, that they've dropped the ball they couldn't afford to drop, basically. But Kavik isn't happy with Do's kind of the way he's talking about this, because in Kavik's point of view, like, he was there, he experienced this. A child is dead. He's not an it. And that's the kind of thing here that, like, the likes of Do have kind of lost in this, is kind of realizing people are here. You are viewing so many different people as assets, pieces in a game, and not treating them as people. So this is the big issue with, like, what was said before about the whole idea of, like, we're willing to put the world leaders at risk if it means gaining control of unanimity. And they basically double down on that here. And Unirak, of course, agrees with it, because what she says is, the boy's circumstances are tragic, to be certain, but had you managed to keep him alive and turn him to our side, we would have had more options. We could have helped develop this child's skills in a safe manner. And Kavik's kind of like, do you care at all about stopping unanimity, or do you just want to own it? They seem kind of like envious of Chai-Si and what she has kind of constructed here. Unirak says both. I know you don't like it, but such is the reality of the world. The best outcome we can hope for is that this ordeal ends with a neutral party firmly in control. And for good or for bad, there isn't a more unbiased and experienced set of leaders than the White Lotus. And it even says, and I like that it says it here, because, like, this has to be the response from Kavik. Kavik didn't bother to hide his snort. Like, really, like, that's exactly what he's been encountering this whole book, effectively, is the likes of Kalyan saying stuff like this. We're playing the game, everyone else isn't, they're just children. The White Lotus are saying it, despite their own blunders in a lot of these situations. And that is the issue here, is that this has all come down to the fact that they want control of these people, just because they have this kind of rare skill, and everyone seems to think they are the most suited to actually control this. They will do it in the most kind of just and kind of righteous way, but the fact that Unirak specifically says, we want to help him to control his skills, and it's like, is that what you want? I would think you probably would want, that's probably the last thing you would want. If you properly want to stop unanimity, it's you know, put him somewhere safe and don't help him to further develop his skills, and protect that idea. And that's how you kind of help unanimity fade into the background. Do, of course, is the kind of White Lotus kind of devotee here, and he gives the typical response here of, like, you think the Avatar's a better choice? You're not that hard to read. You think everything would be free and easy with the Avatar holding the reins? And of course, this is where, like, Kavik is expecting him to go in, like he did kind of previously, just giving out to them for failing so badly. But Do switches it around a little bit. It's still to just create a further situation about here's why the White Lotus is better, but it's at least a little bit more kind of maybe intelligent from Do here, whereas otherwise he's been very blunt and kind of like, don't really like this guy. But he says this: you can't put that much on a single person. A single person breaks, a single person suffers the loss of a dear companion and becomes distraught. A lone human can never be truly rational or detached. The great advantage of the White Lotus is that it has no form or shape or outward appearance. The Avatar has to act in accordance with her form, which limits her options. You think your faith isn't a burden to her. And Kavik, this kind of hits him a little bit. Like, he thinks about all these situations of, like, adoring crowds, the village chief that kind of came up, the village captain that came up to them, these things where she is expected to be a certain way, and in a way can only handle those situations in very, very specific ways because she is the Avatar, whereas the White Lotus is kind of capable of doing some other things. And he kind of thinks to himself that, yes, it's a weird one because I don't agree with them, and Yangchen doesn't agree with them, so in a twisted way, was the White Lotus the only group of people in the world trying to make Yangchen's job easier? And that kind of is probably the best way to frame it, is that, yes, in a way, these are the only two groups trying to play the game in kind of the right way. Obviously, the White Lotus of this era, it feels like they're not quite doing it in the right way, but they are ultimately on the right side. They just have different approaches when it really comes down to it, but they are both on the right side of things, and it's just this is the nuance of the situation, of course. Do admits they can't find Thapa, and that they assume, again, that Team Avatar, Kavik and Yangchen, will be the ones to likely find it. But of course, they want Kavik to relay that information back to them as soon as possible. They do get to the point of, okay, what do we do about Feishan? He is being used as effectively a pawn in this to keep us from acting. Because we all fear that if we act, they'll just kill Feishan, and then what are we meant to do? Yunarak is kind of aware that he's Chai-Si isn't Honsha. She will use the asset correctly, which is the threat of what if I did kill him right now. But no, she is going to wait until the big moment and execute her plan, where she takes out like 3 leaders at once. That's what she wants to do. That's the most effective use of all the assets she has in play, especially with only 1 combustion bender left. So they know they can act a little bit, but she probably will have Feishan killed if the White Lotus are seen to be doing maybe too much, is the kind of takeaway here. This gets them to thinking about, okay, Kalyan, what about my brother? Any information there? Yunarak just says, your brother, the Phantom. We would have liked to have found him too, but his craft is impeccable, better than our best. And this is where Kavik just kind of laughs to himself and just is like, everything goes Kalyan's way, nothing goes my way. Like, Kavik struggles over every obstacle that he faces, whereas it feels like no obstacle ever gets in Kalyan's way. That's the sort of idea here. Blessed. His brother was simply blessed. Hadn't that always been the case? And you can see the kind of frustration growing here with Kavik and Kalyan, and that's obviously what we're kind of building towards, is what is Kavik's kind of decision going to be about sort of how he properly feels about his brother. And in a way, that's what this next final section of this chapter is kind of building towards here. So this is where we switch from that scene to him arriving back at the safe house, of course. So he comes in, Alkadan is like, she wants to see you, the others are kind of waiting in there. He's not heading into like the meeting room, but actually into where Yangchen kind of sleeps, because they're having a meeting basically like in front of her bed, effectively. So, but before that, Kavik does kind of have a little bit of an internal moment as he kind of thinks to himself of like, what Yangchen am I going to encounter here? What is she going to be like? How has she dealt with the loss of Nujian? And because of what he's seen of her across this whole book, specifically the Avatar Gun moment, the possession moment, is there a chance that they go in there and that it is just Yangchen possessed by a different avatar? And there's also the sense of she surely just on her own is almost at an impasse in the same way as one of those avatars. And he's thinking to himself, is the only solution to her grief to be to withdraw and let someone else handle affairs? And this is all kind of with the idea of like, Yunarak asked how Yangchen is doing. And he didn't know what to say initially and was kind of thinking about like, what do you expect me to say? Like, oh, she's doing okay, she's a real trooper, that sort of thing. He just settles on like, I don't know, because he truly doesn't know exactly how she's doing until he gets to kind of, in a way, see her in this moment. And again, because he was the one who saw that Avatar Gun moment, like he's just kind of fearing in a way what it potentially could be. Especially with the doe mentioned from earlier on, is she at her breaking point? And because Kavik kind of assumes that for Yangchen to break, it would be a complete shift in approach to do things in maybe more of the way that Avatar Gun wanted to. So yeah, at this point he goes in, and we see that Yangchen is there. The description of her seems to be that she has got through a lot of her grief kind of on her own. Like when she talks, he does note her voice is scratchy, as if she'd been crying, but he also notes that he hadn't heard her crying in the safe house, of course. So she'd been kind of making sure to kind of do it on her own. It's mentioned that, she's sitting on the bed, like half dressed, her hair tangled and stuff like that. She has a blanket around her. But not because of like depression in a way, self-neglect, lost in mourning, but more the carelessness of a ruler among her servants, of like, you know, I'm not going to get dressed, this is a tactical meeting, we're doing it here, that sort of thing. So she's not like in a kind of absolutely terrible position, considering how bad things could have been, but all the stuff from before still is there, and there's a sense for how is she still keeping going effectively. And what she says is this: I keep thinking about what your brother said to us that night. Let Chai-Si win. Is that what he told you in Jonderie when you turned on me? To let her have what she wants? And Kavik has this interesting kind of response to this, because ultimately he doesn't answer the question as the chapter kind of comes to an end. But we get his whole like thought process about how he kind of wants to answer the question. More or less is what he wants to say, because that is the kind of reality of it, is that you have to view the Kavik Kalyan scene for the first book as being somewhat similar to the Yangchen Kalyan scene where Kavik was also there. Scene of like, that is effectively what he did in both situations, was kind of lay the kind of guilt trip on both characters and be like, Chai-Si is in command here, don't mess with her, side with the kind of winning kind of group over the one that's going to lose, let her win. Like that is the kind of takeaway in both scenes. And he, as he's kind of thinking about how to respond, he's kind of noting the idea that all the other characters are kind of, you know, the rest of the team is angry. The fury of the others was deafening. He wondered if Yangchen had told them about the White Lotus. No is what he comes to, because they all have their own other reasons to hate him that doesn't include the fact that he's also working for the White Lotus in this situation. And this is where we get the kind of dynamic here, the key point. Every single member of the group had given up a portion of themselves in this fight. Home, honor, a lifelong friend. Only one person in the room hadn't paid the heavy price. Him. And looking into the Avatar's grey eyes, which had suddenly become stone walls raised against any attempt to fathom her thoughts, Kavik was certain that was about to change. So that's the setup here, is that referencing his betrayal again makes him think that effectively we're getting to a moment where I have to make the big play. It has to be on me. I now have to take the risk, the sacrifice play. I have to do that. Everyone else has already kind of given something up. He has to do it. And the question really is, okay, what is that? At this point, you're kind of wondering, what exactly is it? Without really, you know, jumping ahead, spoiling everything, it obviously is his current perception of Kalyan is really the idea here. Is obviously Yangchen is thinking about Chai-Si as who they're going up against, but just as dangerous of an opponent is Kalyan, and it is this kind of, they have to tackle the two aspects of the kind of enemy here. And obviously Chai-Si is there, she's the kind of political opponent, but then you also have the kind of master operative effectively, who not even the Order of the White Lotus seem to be able to kind of track or pin down properly. But as we've known from earlier on in the book, kind of there is the weakness with Kalyan. We know what it is. He seems blind to it himself to a certain degree, but obviously that is Kavik himself, and it's great the way that this ends up kind of coming back around. But it's like Kavik has been doing a lot of this with the idea of still ultimately wanting to save his brother in the end, coming out of all of this. But of course, even us as the readers, we haven't really got the full truth about like Kalyan. He seems to have refound his position within Chai-Si's organization, but we don't have all of the details yet. So there's a lot of stuff that we're kind of waiting to see happen here, but like you can see the kind of pieces kind of coming into play here of like, okay, this is the big moment for Kavik of like, if he really wants to properly become a member of the team again, he has to kind of make the same plays as the rest of the team have. And can he do that when he's still working for the Order of the White Lotus, while he still has the conflicting thoughts surrounding his brother and everything that's going on here? That that's the kind of point being made here. But yeah, that's basically the chapter. I think it's a fairly kind of self-explanatory one. The meeting with the White Lotus is very similar to the first one. Obviously, you get a few more details directly about unanimity. I do think the mention of, like, we want to develop the child's skills is a kind of bit of a, really, really, White Lotus? Like, of course you do. Bit of that style of point. I like the slight switch of Do, where, like, he shows a little bit more thought in the situation, rather than just what you would consider to be, like, the typical kind of White Lotus talking points. Even the slight kind of twist once more on the White Lotus's position of, like, even though they're not great in this era, they are kind of the only group properly assisting the style of stuff that Yangchen does. So that is an unusual kind of way to look at it, but definitely interesting. And then the final scene kind of giving you the sense of, like, okay, Kavik is going to be important to however this resolves itself, whatever decision he makes. But also it seems like Yangchen is obviously suffering with the loss of Nujian. And in a way, the fact that she only says one thing, and the one thing is her thinking about let Chai-Si win, in a way kind of like, I understand how you must have felt when you were kind of met with the same idea of let me win, let Chai-Si win. Do I make the same decision as you, kind of type thing, which is just interesting by itself. And, like, is she almost willing to kind of give up in a way and, like, let Chai-Si win, and at least there'll be some stability in some sort of a way, but you're waiting, how will she make her comeback is sort of the idea you're thinking about. But yeah, they're my thoughts on the chapter. Obviously the more important stuff is definitely to come in the chapters following this, but let me know what your thoughts were on this one. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.